Good evening and welcome to the Blueprint Explosive Exclusive. I'm Madhavdas Gopalkrishnan. Viewers, 26 days have passed since the tragic Air India crash, which has claimed lives of more than 270 people. The nation still awaiting answers. Sources say that AAIB, or the Aircraft Accident Investigation Bureau, has submitted a preliminary report on the crash to the Ministry of Civil Aviation and concerned authorities. The report is filed on the basis of initial findings of the probe. So what really went wrong in those 30 seconds? Well, multiple theories have surfaced after the plane crash, but only the investigation can reveal the actual cause. Here's what sources are telling Times Now about the preliminary findings. One is that the preliminary findings have been backed by the internal simulations, and the findings indicate there's some kind of a mechanical or engine failure. Another form of mechanical malfunction is also likely. And meanwhile, there is a parliamentary panel that has held discussions with senior Civil Aviation Ministry officials as well as airline and airport representatives. During the meeting, several parliamentarians have mentioned the Air India plane crash and sought to know the timeline for the final probe report in the matter. Amongst other issues, the sources have said that some members have demanded an audit of the Bureau of Civil Aviation Security as well. Listen in.
Key aspect also has been discussed. Certainly, all members are very much keen about asking about the question on safety matters. So this meeting will continue again because we asked certain questions to reply. Once they replied all these questions again, we will meet.
Let me take this across to Sabyasachi, who's joining us live. Sabyasachi, we were given to understand that this is a report that would be made public on the 11th of this month, but we understand that the preliminary report has now been submitted to the MOCA. What are your sources telling you? Has it been submitted? What exactly are we likely to see, and what are the contents of this report as per sources? Sabyasachi.
That's right. See, as per the sources, the AAIB has submitted its preliminary report on the AI-171 crash to the Ministry of Civil Aviation and the relevant authorities, and the final report is expected to be released on the July 11th. Now, the sources have revealed that preliminary report focuses solely on the data extracted from the black box without offering any official conclusion at this stage. But the sources also tell us that the early analysis suggests that a simultaneous dual engine failure as a likely cause of the fatal crash that killed 241 people, and the black box and simulation data where the flight simulation used using the same aircraft configuration, which Boeing 787 with landing gear that had been deployed and wings flap retracted, did not result in a crash, indicating the flight control settings were not at fault. In fact, the aircraft ram air turbine, which is the rack which deploys only when the engines fail, was activated seconds before impact, strongly supporting the dual engine failure. Now, we had already broken our time stop with the first to tell our viewers that the video analysis which has been examined by the AIB also showed that the aircraft failing to climb after takeoff, followed by a sharp descent before crashing. Now, all eyes will be on the preliminary report, which will be made to public on the 11th of this month.
All right. Thanks so much for that update there, Sabyasachi. We'll come back to you for more updates. So let me quickly open this out and take it across to our guest. Joining us with us is Mr. J.S. Rawat, former Joint Director General of the DGCA. With us also is Captain Sanjay Karve, aviation expert. Devesh Agarwal is also an aviation expert joining us. But my first question is to Anurag Mittal, who's a captain as well as a check for the airman and a trainer. Let me quickly come across to Captain Mittal, and let me begin by asking you, what do you make of this? It is likely to be a mechanical failure, we are told, but there are multiple scenarios within this. It could be potentially either a double engine failure, it could be a complete electrical failure, we're told. There's also the possibility of a software crash. How are you looking at it, Captain Mittal?
Well, this is a very difficult, you're right, there can be multiple theories. You can still not rule out pilot error because a lot of times one engine fails and the pilot turns off the other engine. But this doesn't look like this case in here. The electrical failure will not cause engine failures because engines have their own electrical supply. They, like every engine, comes with their own electrical supply. Even if all the ship loses all its power, the engines keep still running. And when it comes to engine computers, every engine at least have two computers. If one computer fails, the other computer still keeps the engine running. So this is very baffling, like two engines failing at one time. I will not rule out bad fuel yet, bad additives in there, or it could be kind of a mechanical, like a bad part, like, for example, the throttle quadrant, that's the only common link over there. That could be a faulty part. But again, we have to see what the reports are saying on this.
Right. So when you say bad part, is the possibility then of bad maintenance? The issue of maintenance is also a very key one. And Captain Karve, 2 points I'd like to pick up on from what Captain Mittal was referring to. One is, of course, the possibility of bad parts. We all know that, the surveillance of DGCA found a number of lapses, a number of lacunae. When it comes to Air India and maintenance particularly, there are all sorts of questions and speculations that have been doing the rounds. But the other possibility is of bad fuel. Now, how likely is it that something like that has happened at a major airport such as Ahmedabad?
I get what you're trying to say, but let's come to the fuel part. That particular day, at least 40 aircrafts prior to the Air India departure were fueled by the oil company at Ahmedabad. So why is it that it's only 171 had a problem with the fuel? Because there were other aircraft belonging to different airlines, Indigo, Air India themselves, who were fueled from there itself. So I don't think fuel would be a problem. As far as bad parts, as my colleague has said, it is quite possible. If you remember what the Boeing whistleblower had said to the Senate committee, that there was a batch of 787s which was manufactured in a period which were not made as per the exacting aviation standards. And when she had complained to the then CEO or the head of the system, she was told that don't worry, these aircraft are not going to fly in the US, they are all going to fly abroad. And I also understand that this particular serial of Air India was one of the aircraft in that batches on which the whistleblower had apprehensions. So it is quite possible that some bad part may be the cause. Which obviously, once we get the preliminary report on 11th, we'll have a clearer picture.
Right. Mr. J.S. Rawat, I'd like you to comment on this. How much of a possibility is this that, there was some problem either with the aircraft, as the whistleblower has pointed out, which Captain Karve is saying, or the possibility of a faulty part that has led to this kind of a situation? Either which ways, it will raise questions about the quality of the aircraft itself.
At this stage, it is very early stage to point a blame to anything what has happened actually. Whatever appears now from the evidences that the aircraft multi-engine failure has taken place after the takeoff. Because of that, aircraft could not go. But what is the reason? It is very premature to say that whether it was a fuel problem or was it anything else. So it is not difficult to tell at this stage because what has happened actually. The investigation will lead to that. Now they have to, if they have the investigators found primarily that there was a dual engine failure. So what was the cause of that? It will take a long time to determine and find out what is the problem.
Right. And let me bring in Mr. Devesh Agarwal on this. Devesh Agarwal, what do you reckon of this particular report? Yes, there are questions being raised by a parliamentary committee. In the midst of that, we are told that internally the report has been submitted. But the larger question is, when will it be made public? And, there are questions. There are questions about the aircraft. There are questions about maintenance. There are all sorts of questions that are doing the rounds. Where are you looking at and in terms of identifying the problem when it comes to this crash?
Good evening, Madhav, and thank you for having me. See, I have always held that we need to wait for the preliminary report. There is no point of us, taking a guess as to what has gone wrong. The preliminary report has been shared with the government. It kind of reinforces my thing that the AAIB is still under the Ministry of Civil Aviation, and sometimes the regulator itself comes into play. Did they conduct did they do their oversight properly? So it kind of creates a bit of conflicts here and there. Captain Mittal talked about, a potential faulty part in the throttle quadrant. And it's not necessarily a maintenance issue or even a, whistleblower kind of issue. I'll just go back quickly. There was a EasyJet aircraft that was flying from, I think, Spain to the UK, and a totally unexpected small component failed, and despite having 3 different backup systems, the aircraft was suddenly left with no radar, no communications, and no autopilot at all. They had to manually fly it, and at the same time had planes that were crossing over their path at the same altitude. So it took a lot of, they couldn't even transmit, their transponder stopped working, so they couldn't even transmit the emergency signal of 7700. So it was not a failure of anything else, but it was a confluence sometimes. That is why the accident investigations need to be run independently, and we need to let the parliamentarians and all, please request them to stay out of it till the report comes. Once the final report comes, then you start looking at it. And the purpose of a report, whether preliminary or even a final, is not to assign blame, but to find out the actual cause. Why did this happen? So like that, when that part failed, they realized, the designers at Airbus realized that, oh, we have made this assumption, and this assumption has just got obliterated because
Boeing in this case, yeah.
No, I was using the EasyJet as an example. I'm just saying that a very small sensor failed, and what they had assumed as a safety system with 3 backups stopped working. So it sometimes happens that in real life, you come across a situation where you may not have been able to predict what has happened, which component has failed, and how it has led to a cascade of failures.
Absolutely.
So the purpose of an investigation is...
No, I think you have a fair point, because there are over 1,000 such Dreamliners that are flying globally, 1,200 if I'm not mistaken. And let me bring in Captain Mittal back on this. Captain Mittal, this has global ramifications. There are 1,000 such aircraft flying globally. Every airline that's operating it would want to know what's the cause, because if it is indeed something to do with one of the parts, whether it's a sensor, whether it's something else, then this has to be replaced. It has to be acted upon at the earliest, and that's why this information is extremely crucial, globally speaking.
Of course. Dreamliner has had a really nice safety record. This has been the first ever crash reported, and of course, like pointed before, Boeing did have issues with the 737 MAX, but that should not, this airplane has never had that same issue. Now, dual engine failure is an extreme rare occurrence in aviation, especially in such a, in such a advanced jet where they have backup systems and all kinds of things to prevent something like that. So even a single engine failure right on takeoff is something very rare, and then after that another engine failing. So it is, of course, like everybody pointed out, we have to wait for the actual what really happened. We can only speculate here. I was watching different people saying that, hey, one engine failed and the captain responded quickly and he turned off the other engine. Does it happen in training? Yes, it does. But we are all trained to say, okay, if something has failed, leave it alone, go to a safe altitude, and then figure out what the problem is. But we cannot rule that out. I have seen that in training a lot. Like people just start, like if there's initially they want to immediately start correcting the problem, even they're taking off. It's happened before.
Right.
Mr. Part,
sure. Yeah, complete your point. Yeah.
Yeah. As per the faulty part, now it has to be, it's kind of, again, baffling, like how would 2 engines suddenly lose signal? And sabotage cannot also be ruled out in this case because it's such a rare event without actually a human actually doing something physically wrong in there. You cannot really have 2 engine failures like that.
Right. Mr. Rawat, I wanted to comment on this. What is the possibility of sabotage? It's being talked about. We know that there's an MHA panel that has been constituted to look into that aspect. But, really, is that something that can be seriously believed in this particular case? Or is it, something that we will have to ultimately find out and fix? Because, it's a big company, Boeing. It supplies aircraft globally. And many, of course, are wondering whether we'll get to the truth of the matter.
When the investigation starts, it actually starts with so many possibilities of a crash happening. So they have to rule one by one. Engine failure, if that has not happened, what has happened next? Why the engine has failed, whether it was sabotage theory or not. Then they have to rule out that thing or collect the evidences for that, whatever the wreckage is available. So the investigation has to look from all the aspects what has happened for both the engine failures. I'm just hearing since morning that the report has been submitted, but as I had mentioned in your earlier program, that who is the investigator, who has prepared the report? That is the biggest question. The government has not come out so far. Who is the investigator? Because that many people have been talking about the sovereignty of the country, because we have got a sole right for carrying out the investigation. But from our side, the name of the investigator has not been made to the public. So how you expect the report will be made to public? And who is the report writer? What authority he has got if the government has not given him to investigate?
Right. That's a very pertinent question. As someone who's carried out an investigation in the past, Mr. Rawat, what is the procedure from here on? There's the AAIB which has submitted it to the government. Now it's the government's prerogative on how they make it public. Is it incumbent on the government to either submit it before the parliamentary committee, make it public for all to know? What happens from here on?
So once a preliminary report is prepared, that government has to examine the report, what are the things, whether it is acceptable or if any further clarification is required, which normally doesn't happen with the preliminary report. But the preliminary report give only a few facts related to the accidents, and they also submit some safety recommendations which has to be carried out if they consider it is appropriate and if they have to address quickly. After that, it goes to the ministry, and ministry approves the report, and then it is published for the public and other agencies.
Right.
Parliament, it does not go to Parliament at this stage.
Okay, Captain Karve, the question that many are asking is that we have a system where the investigation happens behind closed doors, as opposed to what we see happen, for instance, in the United States, where there's an open investigation and all participate. But the question here is that it's important for that information to come out very quickly in the public domain, so that at least is happening, and that we know that at least which direction the investigation is headed. The final report may come out later.
I agree. Unlike the United States, most of our inquiries or investigation is closed doors. So there is always a room for apprehension as to what exactly transpired in between those closed doors. Here, fortunately, there are 1,100 odd 787s flying all over the world. So it is going to be very difficult for government or any other agency to keep quiet and withhold information from anyone else, because it has got a worldwide ramification, worldwide implication, since practically every nation in the world today is flying a 787. So what we hope is that AIB, when it's forwarded its report to the government will look at it and just let it be published, so that people will know all over the world as to what happened during the preliminary investigation. But like Mr. Rawat has said, we don't know who the lead investigator is. We don't know who was given the task of investigation. We just know that AIB was told that you are supposed to carry out an investigation. But who amongst the AIB was nominated as the lead investigator? This is something we really don't know.
Right. Devesh Agarwal, is this, part of standard practice in terms of the investigation? We don't know the investigator. At the moment, the findings are not yet in the public domain. There needs to be enough, that is done to ensure that there is not just confidence of the flying public here in India, but globally, because there will be global benchmarks against which this entire report will be compared. And people across the world are going to examine it, critique it even. So therefore, it needs to be that much more solid in terms of, being unable to be questioned, if I may.
It goes back to what I was telling you, Madhav, earlier. See, the Air Accidents Investigation Bureau is sanctioned by a parliamentary bill, I think, passed in 2012. There is a complete detailed set of procedures, and the International Civil Aviation Organization, which is called ICAO, which is the United Nations of air transport, they have an Annexure 13, which says in 30 days from the date of the accident, you must publish a preliminary report. Now, as per ICAO rules, the investigator is not obligated to make that preliminary report public. So that is one. But the closest thing I can compare, the last real fatal crash that we had was the American Airlines flight that happened at Washington, D.C. And we have seen that the United States has a board called the NTSB, the National Transportation Safety Board. And that is directly funded by the Congress, the Parliament of the United States. It's under no ministry, it's under no department. The head of the NTSB is nominated by the president, but has to be approved by the Senate. So, and whatever investigations they carry out are, as you exactly pointed out, they are shared openly. And this is what the world will expect from India. It is not just a matter of 787s whose reputation is at stake. We have become the third largest civil aviation market in the world. China, if you recall, about 4 or 5 years ago, there was a 737 that straight crash dove into the earth. The entire aviation industry is like China is refusing to make that report public because the entire world suspects the pilot wanted to commit suicide. Now, how does that harm the reputation of the country and the aviation ecosystem is one that the authorities in charge also have to keep a mind out for. Independence and openness is a sign of moving forward, being transparent, making more progress. I mean, Mr. Rawat pointed out, we don't know who the investigator is. I mean, that is not the way things need to go forward. That is just not correct. That's all I can say. I mean, the government has to get serious about civil aviation and look at independent investigation as well as independent regulation.
Absolutely. No, but in defense of the government, and let me bring in Captain Mittal on this, there is an NTSB member who's there, who's part of the entire investigation. There's also ICAO members who are there for observation purposes, and we had broken that story right here on the channel. So, Anurag Mittal, many will say that perhaps we're being a bit too pessimistic. The global standards, the global regulators like ICAO, NTSB are all part of the investigation. So there's no question of, the investigation not following the global parameters. Would you agree with that?
Of course, like an airplane crash like this, where I'm in the US and it made headlines here too, and I'm in the training department and also I fly airplanes. So we talk about this all the time, and of course Boeing has to be involved. It's an American company, and then NTSB has to be involved, and international. And because this airplane is there across the world, they also have to be involved in this. And I'm been part of some investigations too, because if an airplane crashes, the first thing they're looking at, of course, everybody starts pointing fingers at the pilot because he's the one operating the control. Then after that, the next level is the trainers. Who trained him? What was his training record? All those people are interviewed. So it's a painstakingly long process to come up with the actual findings, because they have to look at everything, including maintenance. Who did the maintenance records? There's a lot of things that go on into this before they can actually come up with the final answer to this. And I would not say the investigation would be compromised, because yes, there are a lot of agencies watching this for sure.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Mr. J.S. Rawat, Anurag Mittal, as well as Captain Sanjay Kadwe, Devesh Agarwal, I'd like to thank all of you for joining us on the show this evening.